We have this panel discussion, but it seems that people or don't know what is panel discussion, or really like loading testing much more. So the panel discussion is where we have different speakers from different countries with a lot of experience in automation testing using Selenium WebDriver. Some of them are writing books and prepare courses on Selenium WebDriver. Some of them are involved in developing of these tools, so they're quite experienced to give you answers on your questions. We had on the conference site we had a submission form where you was able to submit your question before the conference. We have several questions from there, and we could start from these questions. If you want to change the rules and want to start from live conversation, from live questions from the audience, let's do it this way. What is better? Who has interesting questions for our speakers? Oh, nobody, okay. It will be interesting, but I have several. Okay, the rules are very simple. If 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Each question will be addressed to everybody, to every speaker. If you have something to say, just raise your hand and you will give a microphone and say what you think. Okay, let's start from our questions submitted by participants. So, the first... I think it will be a very long list. So I think that the first time you answer a question, you will give short introduction. Okay? It's okay. So, the first question is very interesting. What is the next for Selenium and WebDriver? How do you think, what is the future? Because in the last year, nothing specific was changed in WebDriver, and even WebDriver didn't become a V3C standard. So this is a very long process. So what is the next? Microphone.
Test. Okay, hi, Dave Hafner. I dabble with Selenium. So as far as I know, the W3C standard is still in process for WebDriver, and there's no clear deadline yet, but they're actively working on it. And it sounds like they're into fine details, very specific quibbles about protocols and how they interact. And Selenium 3, the release of that is barring the final ratification of the standard, whereas previously they said they were going to announce it like 2 years ago. But there should, as far as I know, be no substantial API changes to Selenium 3, as opposed to what it was like switching to Selenium 2. So what comes after that, I still think is to be determined, since everybody's head is so focused on the W3C standard. And then there's always, advances for mobile and that kind of stuff that people are trying to do. But for the most part, it's just trying to get the standard in place and get more major vendors on board. Because now that Microsoft is supporting WebDriver, at least for the more recent versions of Internet Explorer, the hope is that once the W3C standard is ratified, that Apple could potentially come on board and provide support, whereas historically the Safari driver has been just built and maintained by people that don't work at Apple, just like the Internet Explorer driver. So the hope is that the W3C standard is table stakes to get everybody in the ecosystem on the same page, and then move forward from there. So that's my understanding of it, at least. Did I cover everything, Dima?
Who want to add something? No? Maybe, okay.
Hi, I'm Oren, and I know I'm coming from the web standards, and usually it takes years. If there's a web proposal, then it's gone. It's in the path of being not just a proposal but a standard. So the hard part is getting a proposal ready. So once you get a proposal, then it means that everybody's said about the big picture, and now it's the fine tuning, which take years. But don't worry, it means it's out there. But what that means is that there's one big standard. It's called Selenium now. So a few years back there was like Flash versus web, like HTML and JavaScript and HTML5. And there's a great standard, and everybody started adopting the web. And now you see a huge wave of adoption over Selenium, and that's great. And it's becoming a standard, which is the most amazing thing of Selenium. Which means it's standard, and it's not going to change. So that's just what I wanted to add. So.
Okay, cool. Anybody else? No. The next question. The next question is: some people name Selenium, and some people name Selenium as WebDriver. Initially, we all know that initially there was one project named Selenium, another one is WebDriver, and then they joined. And but if you go to the Selenium website and want to download something, you see that all downloaded parts are named Selenium. So what is included in Selenium and what is included in WebDriver? So this is the question.
Hi.
Short introduction.
Huh?
Short introduction first.
My name is Dima Kovalenko. I work with Selenium for a while now. So, I think the simplest way to see it is Selenium. The thing that used to be called Selenium is now called Selenium RC or just RC, and that is what everybody pretends doesn't exist. So if you start to ask a question about Selenium 1 or Selenium RC, most other people will say, don't use that anymore. The difference between Selenium 1 and Selenium WebDriver, and right now just saying Selenium and WebDriver is interchangeable, it means the same thing. The biggest difference is it's not JavaScript. It's actually driving in case of Internet Explorer or a Chrome driver, it is actually using the browser how the browser wants to be used. You tell the browser to click. You do not say JavaScript click. And all of these native events is a very, very big improvement in stability and other things. So that's the key word there is don't use RC.
I'm Marcus Merrill, test architect at Retail Me Not. I think the easiest metaphor that I can derive for at least how I see the difference is that Selenium I think of as a little robot, and the little robot is pushing stuff in the browser, which is represented as JSON wire protocol. It's the actual way that the automation conducts its business. WebDriver is the language we use to speak to the robot to tell it what to do. It's the API. So when we say that there's these great mobile testing tools like Calabash out there, but only Appium supports WebDriver, that means Appium supports me being able to write test automation in exactly the same syntax that I would use for Chrome versus native app versus mobile web. So WebDriver is the language, Selenium is the robot. That's the way I think of it. Sound good?
Okay, anybody want to add something? Okay, let's go to the next question. I want to repeat it as is. What is better, Telerik Test Studio or Selenium WebDriver, and why? I could extend this question. What is the better, Telerik Test Studio or Selenium WebDriver, and why? I could extend this question, QTP, Silk Test, and all other existing commercial tools, what is better and why for web testing?
So, hi, I'm Moshe Millman, and actually I'm getting this question a lot in the past year or two since I started doing a lot of meetings with customers in this space. And I think I mean overall the absolute answer I would say is Selenium, but if you want to know, and it doesn't matter if it's Telerik or any other tools. And I think today W3C will help it a lot, but Selenium is becoming like sort of like a market standard for automating web applications, and if you're working on automating web applications, or you can be sure that once it's W3C certified, you can be sure that you have support for all the new standards, everything else that comes out. So I mean that's my view for that, and also of course it's open source, so that makes it much easier to use it.
My thoughts are, with regards to commercial versus open source tooling, either one has a cost, and either you're paying for it in time of man hours or in the cost of licensing, and But I think it's telling that even commercial tools like SmartBear are starting to add and implement WebDriver support. So I think the easy answer typically in the industry is leaning in the direction of open source as the de facto way to go. But I think that each company has different longings. Like some companies want to pay for support and want to feel like they have that warm safety blanket, and whereas other companies are okay with putting in and investing time and having resources that are dedicated to the test framework. So I guess it depends on really the leanings of the company, because there's nobody that really offers commercial Selenium support, and the closest you'll find to that is using a commercial tool that potentially has WebDriver support baked in. But beyond that, the question of Telerik versus Selenium is kind of a hotbed topic in Selenium, because there was a white paper that Telerik released on the 5 hidden costs of using Selenium, and then like all the core committers and bloggers in Selenium space kind of publicly flamed Telerik, and so it's kind of a funny question to ask. So I think it depends is the best answer. But I think that the industry is, and based on the usage, it's really open source is winning, and I think that the tools are trying to adapt to that. So.
Okay, thanks. Any other opinions? No? The next question is more personal. What is the trickiest way of using Selenium in your life? So when you use Selenium for something unusual, so not for testing, but something interesting.
So I'm Thomas. I'm from Sweden, Stockholm. I had the unfortunate to have to work with something called Hybris. That's a tool where you can build web shops, and adding a user with its password was the trickiest case we found, and it was really easy to do it with Selenium. It was horrible to do it through the API, or actually there wasn't an API. We did it manually and realized that there were 300 calls to the database for adding one user. So that's one case we actually, we were able to do it very easily with Selenium. So if anyone says Hybris, go in the other direction.
My children's school has a fundraiser where every time somebody drinks a Coca-Cola, it has a code on the bottle cap. Do they do that here? There's a code on the bottle cap, and you have to type it into the... Right?
It's not so popular here, but...
Well, it's poison, so... So we were rewarded for everyone drinking poison. So I was voluntold to take over this program for my children's school, and I was given 800 bottle caps that I had to enter. So when you enter it, you hit submit, and it says, what product did you use? And I say, Coke Zero. And then 1 out of 4 times a little advertisement comes up, and you click the X on it, and then you hit submit. So in an hour and a half, Selenium was entering these things day and night. I never hooked it up to Grid, or I could have done it a lot faster, but my kids' fundraiser is now completely automated through Selenium. That's my trickiest use.
There's 2 cases. The more boring but practical was I'm self-employed, so I have to file federal and state withholding taxes in the United States, and the websites for these are very archaic, there's like 16 different steps to it, and so I wrote Selenium scripts to automate paying my taxes every month. And the other one was an example we put together for a meetup was ordering a pizza on somebody's behalf. So using Selenium. So
actually, it's quite a similar example, but in my previous company, we had a very annoying process of submitting travel expense, and back then I used to travel very frequently, so I just built something that will just, take the receipts and just the numbers and just put it and go through all the approvals, because everything you had to submit, you have to 3 times approve that you really did this expense, so that's just to make life a bit easier.
So, when you're a student and you have a great course you want to go to, but there's a registration which starts in a specific hours, and the first one who enters who gets it. But if you write a script that tries and every few seconds, it's okay. So it works. So I have a friend who did that. Okay.
This isn't exactly my example, but at a conference I went to, I heard a guy, he got several jobs through creating a script that would go through Craigslist every day, go through every city throughout Craigslist and look for remote-only jobs. And at the end of every day, you would just get a report generated from his Selenium scripts that would tell him where all his jobs, future jobs may be. So.
At least once a month in the IRC channel, somebody will come in and start asking, how do I do this in the IDE? How do I put in a loop and a conditional statement in the IDE? And it turns out that the person is trying to make Selenium play cards for money, to play blackjack for money. And I guess it's not the trickiest thing, but I think it's more of a negative statement, like, don't do that, please.
So I'm Igor from Belarus, and it's a problem for us to book a time slot in embassy in order to get Schengen visa. So I wrote a script in order to monitor free times. Yeah, we have lots of versions of such kind of scripts in Belarus on different forums in open source.
Well, I feel I'm Alex. I live in Switzerland, but I'm American, quite obviously. I feel less qualified to opine on some matters here than some of the people sitting next to me, because I've been doing this for less long than they have. But certainly here, actually, getting to what Igor just said, I think for any of us who live in Berlin sometimes, as my friend here does, if you need to get an appointment at one of the Amts in Berlin to get a parking permit or something like that, it takes often a few months, but sometimes the things pop up at the last minute, so that's a brilliant idea. I may have to do that. But from a commercial standpoint, we discovered we were doing automation testing and creating automated data, and we had a system that had been cobbled together by a startup with when they were building it, they didn't know whether they would exist in a couple months. So in terms of actually creating the data, we discovered that if we tried to do everything directly, there were a lot of side effects that by going through the system that did not occur properly. So we used the actual, what we called the admin tool, the administration interface, using Selenium to create everything, and then everything would happen exactly as if it was being created in production. Another thing we did is we had to do testing of payments, so we had to do real payments, and then we had to go through and refund all the payments, which of course is not so fun to do, especially if you're using a grid and testing on 20 different browsers and operating systems. So we used a Selenium script to go through and refund all the payments. But then, of course, every time our payment provider would change their website, everything would stop working and we'd have to go redo it. But it was still an enormous time saving over doing it all manually.
Okay, cool. I could add my personal story. We have different conferences, trainings, and so on. And sometimes we use online presentation tools for this, for GoToWebinar or something like this. And these tools always have very long registration step. You need to fill much data about your city, about your country, anything else, your email address, and so on, so on. And we don't want to be so boring and ask our participants to fill everything this. So we use just a simple Google table where you put in the form only needed information, and then we have scripts that register you in this online webinar system and fill everything else with default values, and you join us and don't feel this crazy process. So the next question is, for a long time Selenium IDE exists, and it's even alive now. And another project was started as a replacement for Selenium IDE is Selenium Builder. What is the current state of Selenium Builder, and is it a recommended way for beginners to start writing their tests?
I mean, I would say, I've never used the IDE. I would say, honestly, writing tests programmatically is certainly better than that.
Basically, Selenium Builder is a project that the guys at SOSLab started, and I know that they're now doing like another version of it, which is supposed to come out, and I think that it's supposed to replace Selenium IDE at some point. It's not. I don't have like the official answer. We can probably check it and post it online. But that's basically the idea. And it's supposed to be easier, like all the process of migrating to code and all the process of recording with some conditions and all that stuff should be improved in the new version.
Okay. Anybody has another experience? Nobody used Selenium IDE?
This is more from a perspective of the origin of Selenium IDE. It came out of Japan. It was originally created by a Japanese developer, and from my understanding, the majority of users that use Selenium IDE are actually in Japan because of the language support, which is something that's, I don't think, a full consideration for a Selenium builder, which it could be a potential roadblock for that becoming the new de facto standard for a record and playback tool. So that's just kind of an aside, but I do think there is progress being made, but slow progress for Selenium builder. So
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. The next question is, what is the most interesting framework or library based on Selenium you see now on the market? So maybe open source, maybe commercial, that helps people use Selenium.
So the question was proxy or framework? A proxy, you said?
Anything that helps to use Selenium in the real life.
Oh, I see. Well, so from my experience, there are dozens of Selenium frameworks that are open source. There's also some that are commercial, but everybody seems to want to build their own. So, like, there isn't a popular one. There just are ones that exist, and there's ones for every language, every programming language that I've found. And in terms of some, that's the easy answer. Some of them make it easier to use proxy servers. Some of them make it easier to do page objects. But for the most part, everybody seems to ultimately want to just build their own framework. So.
Well, I sure hope there's going to be a consolidation in the next few years, because as you said, there's a lot of projects, and if there's a Selenium grid, it doesn't cut it for people because it has a lot of things that you need to know. Dima here is an expert, and he wrote an open source project, and I know there's a similar project done by Marcos, and I sure hope it will, not just Selenium will be out there, so everybody's using it. So it's now the standard, the de facto standard. But I hope that those libraries will join, will be grouped, consolidate into one big framework that will help others. So everyone needs a grading system, a grid system. Everyone needs it. So either it's commercials like Sauce Labs, BrowserStack, etc., and or like the open source tools we see on the web. But everybody needs it. So I sure hope it's going to grow and become a project, maybe into Selenium in the future. At least everyone would know about it. So and not just rewrite again and again and again.
So I will speak about Java stack, which is, I believe, the most popular language in order to write Selenium tests. So if I will start right now new project for test automation in Java, so I will definitely will not write another wrapper for Selenium, because there are lots of really good solutions. So at the moment, for my opinion, it's my personal opinion, the most mature solutions are provided by Yandex. So HTML elements, and there are some reporting system on top of it. It's really good examples of good extensions of Selenium, how it should be, how it's open sourced, and how it's compatible with the current API that WebDriver has. So that's one example, and another example, maybe if you don't need some huge page objects, then Selenid, I believe it will be a nice option. And Andrei will be here in the evening, and you can ask him about this Selenium extension.
By the way, I want to talk about Marcus's plugin. It's so cool. Basically, you have... Oh, you want to talk about it yourself? No, basically, his plugin sets up the when for the grid. If you run out of nodes in your grid, it will start up new nodes in EC2 and Amazon Cloud for you, and then take them offline when you're done. That is like the coolest thing. I just saw it the other week, and I'm just, yeah, I want to steal all your code. There's.
Yeah, let's just finish with questions and then the next one.
I just want to add on to Igor's point about Yandex. The Allure framework is for a long time, I think one problem that hasn't been solved well was an HTML report generator, and I think that they've nailed it. I think that that's like probably the coolest thing out there because it's language agnostic, and so I think that that's really worth talking about. That I think would be a huge time saver. So, yeah.
Cool.
I mean, I would just have a comment that we use the JBehave Selenium plugin or library, whatever it was, and in general, the problem with using these libraries is that the versioning of the embedded Selenium is way behind the current production Selenium. So, my personal preference is not to use any library, but I could be wrong.
Okay, you have question or you want to add something, Ruslan? Yeah.
Yeah, the question was our opinion on current JavaScript Selenium WebDriver and testing frameworks. And so some of the examples you mentioned were Protractor and Selenium IO and Jasmine potentially and some other ones. I have some experience mainly with Selenium IO, and I know that there are a couple, there's at least one other, if not another, potential JavaScript library for that, for Selenium WebDriver. But Selenium IO seems pretty robust and well maintained for as far as a Node library goes. And but it has really has some interesting, promising things built into it, like visual testing. If you're used to JavaScript and familiar with that and willing to deal with callbacks and all that kind of stuff, then I think it's a good library. I do think that the example code and documentation that's available for JavaScript is underrepresented. I don't think that there's a lot of good resources available for it, which is a hindrance because there's people that want to use it. So I think that there's a real hole for that. But as far as I can tell, the libraries are definitely coming along well. And there's also people who are potentially more inclined to use something like Phantom.js potentially with GhostDriver under the hood. So people are doing it. I just don't think that enough people are showcasing it. So that's, I think, like, it's not that the tools don't exist. I think the tools are in a good state. I just think that the documentation and blog posts behind it, people aren't giving massive conference talks about it.
So is it only for people who use only JavaScript technologies like Node.js and everything else, or for everybody? So is it commonly used by people who don't create the applications in JavaScript?
In my opinion, no. I don't think it's. I think it's for people that are JavaScript developers that want to use it. My recommendations typically for clients are reliant on who's going to own the language and what experience they have, and it's very seldom that the people that end up doing testing do JavaScript. It's either Java or a scripting language like Ruby or Python potentially. And that's in my experience. I've only recently gotten inquiries for people for JavaScript, but I think it's because they have a JavaScript background. So. That's my opinion.
Well, lately there's more and more developers that's starting to write their own tests. The TDD is a success on the back-end side, but until now not on the front-end side. So most of the web developers, they know JavaScript. That's what they live on. So that's what they do best. And having worked with different languages and different methodologies, like JavaScript on the front end and writing your own test, and now you have to learn Java, which is statically typed, and it's different. It's not that hard, but it's a switch that you don't want to make. You want to invest, you want to make the ROI the very positive, so you want to make the little as you can to start writing tests. So it's best if you if those developers, and they're getting more and more front-end developers that doing maybe full stackers, or even you can see that the client is getting richer and richer. The code is, a lot of the code is moving to the front-end side. So those developers want to write unit tests, they want to write end-to-end tests, and you have with Selenium, you have the bindings for the JavaScript. Now there's coming a new framework on top of it, which give you a bit more. For example, Protractor, which gives you better tightness with Angular, which is there's everything that concerns to asynchronously. It's where the people, the beginners usually fall. This is the hard part with end-to-end testing. So I guess it's really it will. The number of users will rise, I guess, a lot. So I think it's a good idea for if a company, if the core developers are the front end, there are companies where the big logics, it's in the front end, and those guys want to help, that's great, and use JavaScript.
Okay, the next question is it's a very related question, just to finish this topic. Polyglot programming is very popular now, and in different companies, many languages are used. And from your experience, what language is the best suited for using Selenium WebDriver for testing, for automating web activities, and so on?
There is a Visual Basic driver out there, just saying.
I mean, the fact that the API is consistent across language bindings for the most part, like 98% consistent, and some exception handling may be different depending on the language bindings, but I think that whatever language you're comfortable in will get you most of the way there. I think that it also depends on your experience coming into it. I also say that as long as you have an IDE, Java is a decent option, if you already are comfortable with Java. But if you're completely new to programming, then something easier like scripting language would be easier to pick up. So I think it really depends more on the person. It's not that choosing one language would prevent you from being able to implement something. It's just that the learning curve for the language could prevent you from implementing something.
I'd also add a note that it might also depend on the development team language that they have. If you have the ability to be surrounded by 30 Java programmers who all know what they're doing, you might not want to go with Python because you won't have someone readily available to answer questions. So you just factor that in as assuming, yeah.
But from another side, it may be a very interesting chance to extend their knowledge and to start using another programming language. So maybe.
Yeah.
Everybody want to start something interesting on their job, and the regular job don't have this chance. Yep. Okay, somebody want to add? No? Your question? I will give you a microphone.
Yeah, thank you. My question was triggered by Oren. Yeah. When developers have knowledge in front end, and you say they can help. So better to have framework which written in the same language. But maybe someone had a situation when the same WebDriver framework coexisted in two different languages. For example, like conception on PHP and Java with TestNG, for example. Is this something impossible? Or, well, if currently there are two frameworks, what can be future for this? Is it a feasible idea, or it's something that is something risky, and we should switch to only one language, like Java, or just the same which developers are using?
It's a hard question, and the answer is the answer is probably problematic as well to begin with, because I haven't seen a company that there was a few companies that didn't switch languages and don't have in the middle they have Java and JavaScript or Python. I've seen so many mixes that people try to move from one to another, and it takes them years to take it off. I still know companies who use GWT, and so of course I think it's better to have one to isolate the knowledge. That's what you want to do. You have the knowledge and the code base to represent it in one location. So the most important thing is, of course, to know, to take the talented people who knows how to do those things. It doesn't matter which language. That's why we're all fighting about the languages, but the principles is what's hard, not the language. You can pick up a language in a few days or weeks, depending on your experience. But the hard part is maturing, to know how to test, what to test. So I guess that's the real good question. And if it doesn't split your core engineers into different knowledge locations, so my answer is try to keep it in one single location. But that's almost impossible in a big company.
One of the first projects I was on, it was written in Java, but some of the developers wanted the test to be in Ruby, but majority of the developers did not want to move from Java to Ruby because it's like, oh, it's just this new fad, whatever, it's not going to stick around. Ruby is just not going to be a real language. And the difficulty there was that it was a very big test suite, but none of the developers wanted to go and fix a test when they broke something. They just did not even care. They would just... but right now at Groupon, we have different parts. We have parts that are written in Java. We have parts that are written in Node.js. We have parts written in Ruby. It really now depends on which team wants to, because we have some back-end services that are written in Java, and we have some QA people who are comfortable with Java, so they wrote their tests in Java, and then we still have a bunch of tests that are written in Ruby and whatever, and it really depends on letting each small team use what they want, and then if somebody wants to jump from one team into another and learn another language, if they're willing to do it, I guess that's the key part is your whole team willing to experiment with something else, or are they just like, nope, I'm done. I don't want to learn anything else. Forever, ever and ever, I'm going to die programming Java. That's the problem.
And one more case study about such kind of situation. So in Wargaming, 1 year ago, we have the whole test automation in Java, but all development is done in Python. So, and it was a real issue because we had test automation and development, they were fully separate. So we did a switch, and right now the results are really good because we are talking with development on the same language. We are sharing experience, we are retrieving some knowledge from dev team, as well as test automation engineers are providing some knowledge about testing to development. So it is better, definitely. Yeah. So we rewritten everything. So we have few code in Java left, but it's just few legacy test cases. So we did a switch. It took us almost 1 year, but right now test automation is much more better.
Okay, Alexander.
Seems to always reach the end before it comes back to me. I have what I would call here with the Tower of Babel approach, which is don't do that. I've worked on projects where from one end of the system to the other there are 7 different languages because somebody came in and decided, oh, we're going to do this with Microsoft Visual C++, and we're going to do this part in Java, we're going to do this part here. I mean, I would say classically you have, the database, you have stored procedures written in SQL and things like that, and people are even moving away from that because even though SQL, you can write incredibly complicated stored procedures that do things way faster than you can do it another way, people say, I don't want a whole bunch of Java programmers and then they can't go in and deal with the SQL and I can't find SQL people. So, I mean, I think, to me, I find design patterns and architecture to be far more interesting than learning new programming languages because all programming languages at the end are kind of the same unless you're talking about Lisp or PL1 or COBOL or things that nobody uses anymore. But if you have one code base that's all in one language and all of your developers can work on any part of it, I think it's kind of a no-brainer.
Okay. The next question is related to people who have questions. For example, they find some inconsistency or some issue with Selenium WebDriver, where they need to go at first place. Because it seems that because sometimes people ask questions in Selenium developers Google group, and there's no chance to get an answer. So what is the right order of places they need to visit and find the answer for their question?
Well, I would say they should start with the source code, but
if you ask any core committer like Dima, the first answer any of them will give you will likely be go to the Selenium IRC chat channel on Freenode.
So it's open for everybody?
It's open for everybody. Anybody can join and ask your question there, and eventually somebody will answer it. There is the developers list. There is the Selenium users list. There's Stack Overflow. There's LinkedIn user groups. There's like everything you can think of. But the tried and true simplest place I found to go is the Selenium IRC chat channel, because the core committers, a lot of them hang out there and they are active on the list at various times of the day. They're all spread out across the world, so they all interact at different times, and a lot of them do actually like stay logged in and check and see if someone like asked a question, and they'll respond, or whoever's on will respond, and they may point you to an existing issue that may help solve or steer you to helping you open an issue if it is a new one. The easiest thing I would say is what I usually do is I'll look through the open issues on Selenium issues list and see if my issue is new or existing, and if it is existing, odds are there might be a workaround someone posted. And if not, then I'll post it. But usually, that before I post anything, I'll go and double check on the Selenium chat channel and ask somebody.
I mean, the typical workflow that works really well for me is Google. That will typically take you to Stack Overflow. If that fails, Selenium, don't use Selenium developers list. That is for if you want to contribute to the Selenium project itself, try Selenium users list. If you cannot get an answer there, IRC is always available. And if you cannot get an answer in IRC, then go and figure it out, and then write a blog post so it shows up on Google and everybody starts from... Yeah, exactly.
Another source of the answers, so there is a Skype chat in Russian. So, but the problem of this Skype chat is that the number of people in Skype chats are limited is up to 300 people. So it's always 300 people. Some of them people are joined left, but it's really hard to get into there. But there are really lots of discussions in Russian about some newbie questions, how to use Selenium and other blah, blah, blah.
So maybe if you want to go into, get into this Skype thingy, so you should probably write a Selenium script who does the...
Okay, we have another question.
Hear me? Another question about mobile technologies. So, as we all know, HTML5 is acceptable on all browsers, even mobile, but Selenium is almost for desktop, and there are small pieces for Android or iOS and iPhones. So what would you recommend to use for mobile testing with Selenium, like something like Appium with real devices, or something like Source Labs, Browser Stack, etc. with virtual machines? What is your opinion about that technologies, and what should we do as Selenium testers?
Okay, so coming from web development, you hear from everyone they want real devices. So this is the one thing, emulators is not enough. So I think the thing that's bothering everyone right now is lack of good documentation. When you first want to try Appium, you end up, you don't know exactly what went wrong and what exactly you... I talked to a lot of people and they all say, it took me a while to climb that hill. So I guess that the future will be much brighter. That's what we're going through. It's with mobile, but we're still in the stage where there's no so much documentation, so you can just Google and see, oh, that's simple. I can just one click, and so it's still not that easy to do it on yourself. That's why companies, commercial companies, are very successful on that. And the nice thing is, of course, is that since Selenium is becoming de facto standard, it means they're aligning. The commercial tools are aligning to Selenium. So it's going to make you much easier if you want to get started with them. Then move on to your own implementation or create one. So,
yeah, just to add on what Oren just says. First of all, I think the situation with Appium has improved over the past few months. So in the past, it used to be very difficult to get started, and the documentation was not that amazing. But nowadays, it's improving, and new versions of Appium makes it easier to get started with Appium. And regarding your questions about cloud vendors and whether to use emulators or real devices, that's like a philosophical question. But in general, what's nice to see is that many of the cloud vendors are now standardizing on supporting Appium. So lots of the vendors we started with their own framework for automating tests on mobile are now supporting Appium as well. So you see, like, I mean, actually, almost all the cloud vendors that are providing devices on the cloud are now supporting, which is a good sign. So that's a good reason why to stick with Appium. And again, with the question about emulators and real devices, so there are some emulators which are doing quite a good job in like simulating the real experience, but you always have to test at least some of your tests on real devices because you can't predict where are going to be the changes. I mean, it really depends who you ask, because if you ask the infrastructure vendors, they will say test always on real devices, but I think probably for most cases you can test at least some of the functionality of the emulators and leave the final test, the acceptance test, to do on real devices, but you're going to get different answers from different people on this one.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, just real quick. Yeah, saying Appium's come a long way. It is starting to mature a lot, and going back to like what you were saying on emulator versus real devices. Like me personally, I use an emulator to do all my smoke tests for like CI. I push all my tests to either Sauce Labs or a couple other cloud services. It's come a long way in that respect. As you said, like there is like a lot of other cloud services popping up every day that you could actually support Appium. Another one that I actually use for real devices now when I actually run my regression suite is called Test Object. They're Berlin-based, and it's actually they're really good. They tons of devices available, give you a nice report. They screen record your tests. You get a HTML report after, so I would recommend them if you're going to do real devices on cloud.
Okay, so last answer, because we are out of time. So, Alexander.
I would just say a few years ago I did write an iPhone game, and I built the whole thing using the emulator, and when I actually put it on the phone, it did not work at all. So I went back to what I said in my last thing, which is I started over and did the whole thing running it on the iPhone. I would say this is kind of the wild, wild west. With Selenium, you can have a Selenium grid. You can spin up virtual machines from scratch and have them run your browser and kill them afterwards. That's quite easy. With devices, there doesn't seem to be, you can certainly plug them into USB and run tests on them, but there doesn't seem to be any automated way to reboot them, which would make life very easy. Also, of course, with Android, you're dealing with tons and tons of different devices and screen formats and stuff like that. Apple makes it easy, like they did in the old days, by supplying all the hardware. So.
Okay, thank you very much. We are out of time, so I hope it was very useful. Our speakers will be today the whole day here, so you could find them and ask your personal question about technologies, about their talks. So thank you so much.